I want to start by saying that I have been a signals operator for 19 years. 19 years of sitting in this chair, monitoring frequencies across 47 cataloged star systems and 6 uncatalogued drift zones, where the static gets so thick you start hearing patterns that aren't there. 19 years of training my ears and my instruments to recognize distress signals, emergency broadcasts, ship transponder pings, beacon relays, civilian chatter bleed-through, military encryption bursts, and the kind of deep space white noise that sounds almost like someone breathing if you listen long enough. I have heard a lot of things. I have never heard anything like what came through on the morning of day 204, cycle 7, from a point in space that our charts listed only as grid reference unmarked Theta 9. Let me tell you how it started. The morning shift on Omega 7 is quiet. It is always quiet. The Calder Nebula Fringe is what our senior supervisor calls a diplomatic dead zone, which means nothing important is supposed to happen here. We monitor because monitoring is what we do, but most days the most exciting thing that comes through my station is a cargo relay confirmation from a Brethek freighter 3 systems over, or a faint echo of military channel traffic from the Velindra patrol corridor. That morning, I had my third cup of stim brew cooling on the console beside me. I was running a routine sweep of the lower frequencies. My partner, Das, that's signals operator first class Das Quellen, he'll give his own account if you ask him, was asleep in the break alcove with his headset still on, which he does, and which I have told him about 17 times. And then the signal hit. Not subtle, not a bleed-through, not a faint ghost frequency you have to process through 3 filters before you can make anything out. A clean, direct, human band radio transmission, type beam, point-to-point construction, which means whoever sent it built the antenna themselves from components rather than using a standard issue emergency transponder, because standard transponders don't transmit in type beam. They broadcast omnidirectional. This was something else. Something more deliberate. I sat up straight. I turned up the receiver gain. I put both hands on the console. And then the voice came through. Young, male, human, definitely human. The vocal signature was unmistakable even before the language resolved. He sounded calm, not distress call calm, which is its own specific kind of strained, controlled calm. He sounded genuinely, actually calm. The way you sound when you're explaining something you find interesting. And the first words I heard, the very first words from what would become the most analyzed transmission in the last 40 years of galactic relations history, were these. Okay, so the main platform is about 9 meters up, and I know that sounds high, but the branch structure on these trees is actually really good for load distribution. So let me walk you through how I figured out the anchoring. I sat there for a moment. I pressed the save function on my recorder. I pulled up the location trace. I tapped my console 3 times in the pattern that wakes Das from a dead sleep. He stumbled out of the break alcove with his headset tangled around one ear, and he said, "What frequency?" Because that's always the first thing Das says. I told him. He came and stood beside me and listened. The voice continued, unhurried, describing rope tension and wood grain, and something he called the knot problem, like he had been practicing this explanation for an audience he knew was listening. Das and I looked at each other. "Is that," Das said slowly, "a human child describing a treehouse?" "I think it's a human cadet," I said, "and yes, it is. From an uncatalogued world. Unmarked Theta 9. There was a pause. "We should," Das started. "I'm already sending the alert up the chain," I said. I flagged it priority alpha, not because a treehouse tour constitutes an emergency, but because a human being transmitting from an uncatalogued world on a tight beam antenna he built himself absolutely does. What followed was one of the strangest, most documented, most argued about, most quietly extraordinary incidents in the history of the United Earth Forces and the Galactic Unified Council. I want to make sure it's recorded right. So let me tell you everything. Elias Voss was 17 years old when he went missing. He had been 17 for exactly 11 days. He was assigned as a junior support cadet aboard the UEF training frigate Perseverance, one of 22 cadets on a standard orientation transit, what the fleet calls a quiet route run, which means it is supposed to be boring. No combat, no engagement zones, just a logistics route that gives first-year cadets time to learn the ship, learn the protocols, and learn how to not panic in deep space. His file, which I have reviewed in full with family permission, describes him as follows. Height 175 centimeters. Build moderate, unremarkable. Eyes brown, hair dark brown, kept slightly longer than regulation, which had been noted in his record twice as a minor infraction. Academic standing, upper third of his cohort, particularly strong in environmental studies, navigation theory, and what the Academy calls improvised resource management, which is the formal name for the class where they teach cadets how to survive with limited materials. He had scored in the 92nd percentile on that last one. His instructor's notes were consistent. They used phrases like self-directed, curious to a fault, tends to find his own approach, and from one instructor who clearly found this charming rather than problematic, will absolutely take the long route if he thinks it's more interesting. One instructor, Senior Training Officer Bex Marata, wrote something in his annual evaluation that I think is worth preserving here exactly as she wrote it. Cadet Voss does not panic. I have deliberately introduced stress scenarios into training situations twice this cycle without warning. Both times he assessed, adapted, and continued. He is not fearless. The physiological monitors show he experienced normal stress responses. He just doesn't let fear make decisions for him. That is extremely rare at 17. It is frankly rare at any age. Before the academy, he was from a small settlement in what used to be called northern Quebec. His mother was an environmental engineer. His father repaired and maintained cold weather infrastructure. He had two older sisters, both of whom had already left for fleet service. He grew up, by all accounts, knowing how to build things, knowing how to read weather, knowing how to be alone in the cold and not treat it as a problem to be solved by panicking. The incident that put him on an uncatalogued world happened during what was supposed to be a routine transit jump. The Perseverance hit gravitational interference from an unmapped microsingularity, a known but statistically rare hazard in the Calder Fringe regions. The jump drive calculated an emergency partial reentry. The ship made it through, damaged but intact. But the emergency evacuation sequence that activated during the drive disruption deployed 4 of the 7 emergency pods before the crew could override the automated system. 3 pods were recovered within 48 hours. They contained 11 cadets, 1 instructor, and a medic. The 4th pod, containing Elias Voss, vanished. The trajectory modeling put it somewhere in the unmarked theta sector. But unmarked theta is a large designation, covering roughly 900 cubic light-years of uncharted space, and without a transponder signal. The pod's transponder had been damaged in the deployment. There was no way to narrow it down further. He was logged as missing, status unknown. His family was notified. His file sat in the missing personnel queue for 46 days. And then Yena Vral picked up his signal. IGNAL begins, 3:47 station time, Omega 7 local clock. Initial carrier tone, 2.3 seconds, tight beam construction confirmed. Voice identified as human male, approximate age 15-20. Language, standard English, moderate North American dialect. Okay, so, if anyone is picking this up, hi. I'm Cadet Elias Voss, UEF serial number 7741, and I have been on. I'm going to call it Theta 9b because I need to call it something for 46 days now. I'm alive. I'm in good shape. I want to lead with that because I know those are the important parts. The pod came down hard but not catastrophic. I had a medkit. I had rations for 30 days which I have been supplementing for the last 16, and I'll explain that. I had basic tools, emergency thermal gear, the standard survival package, and a construction kit for an emergency antenna, which here we are. Hi. Note from Vral. At this point in the original transmission, there is a brief, clear sound of something rustling close to the microphone, followed by what sounds like a small animal noise. Operator initially flagged as interference. It was not interference. I also have OK, so this is the part where the transmission gets a little unusual, and I want to preface it by saying that I have thought carefully about whether this is the right thing to include, and I decided that honesty is better than a clean emergency broadcast, so here goes. I have company. Not human company. I am going to describe this as accurately as I can because I think it matters for whoever needs to plan the retrieval operation. There is a species on this world that I have not been able to identify from any of my cadet catalog entries. They are large. Adults are approximately 2 to 2.5 meters tall at the shoulder when on all fours, which is their preferred movement style, though they can stand bipedal and often do when they are using their forelimbs for tasks. They are covered in what I initially cataloged as fur, but is more accurately a dense layered coat with an outer layer that seems to have some kind of moisture-resistant property. Color varies, but the dominant individuals I have observed are in the dark gray to black range. They are intelligent. I want to be very clear about that. Not tool-adjacent intelligence, not complex instinct, actual problem-solving, communicative, social intelligence. I have watched them use simple tools. I have watched them teach their young. I have watched one of them figure out a problem I was working on and gesture toward a solution I hadn't considered. I have not been harmed by them. The opposite, actually. There is one in particular, a juvenile, I believe, based on comparison with the adults I have observed, who has been with me for approximately 31 of the 46 days. I did not name it immediately because I wasn't sure about naming protocols for potentially sentient species, but around day 30, I accepted that I had already started thinking of it as a name in my head, so I might as well commit. I'm calling him Rook. Note, long pause here, approximately 4 seconds. Rook he is about the size of a large dog. Well, a large dog if the large dog were built like a bear and had a face that looks like someone designed it to be specifically difficult to read and then gave up halfway through because some of the expressions are completely transparent. He has been sleeping near the entry of my shelter since day 22. He has watched me build everything I've built here. He helped me find food sources on day 18, which is the reason I stopped worrying about the rations running out. He has opinions about my construction choices, loud ones by his standards. He is here right now. Note the animal sound repeated here, closer to the microphone. There was an unmistakable quality of proximity to it. That was him. He does that when he thinks I'm taking too long to get to the point. He is not wrong. I am taking too long to get to the point. The point is, I am alive. I am functional, I have shelter, I have food. I have made tentative non-hostile contact with an apparently sentient species, and I have built an antenna. I'll give coordinates from pod landing data. Hold on. 7 seconds of ambient sound, wind. Something that sounds like leaves, but a different texture of leaves than earth leaves. A low sound from Rook that might be described as patient. Okay. Pod landing coordinates from the emergency navigation log are as follows. Coordinates given here, omitted from public transcript per standard galactic cartography security protocol, but logged separately with the UEF navigation division. Come find me. Take your time getting the jump calculations right. I'm not going anywhere. The weather here is actually pretty reasonable most days. And since I'm already transmitting, and since I've been alone for 46 days except for Rook, and since I think I might as well give you something useful while the signal is warm, I want to tell you about the treehouse. Note, Operator Das Quellen, reviewing this transcript later, circled the phrase, tell you about the treehouse, and wrote in the margin. And this is where it became something else entirely. So here's the thing about this world's tree structure. The trees on Theta 9b are, I don't have a better word for this, massive. Not just tall, though they're tall, we're talking 60 to 80 meters on the ones near my landing site. But the trunks are what get you. The average trunk diameter in this grove is somewhere between 4 and 6 meters. The bark has a texture like compacted fiber, almost like someone wove it, and it's dense enough that I have been using cut sections as structural materials because it holds load the way good timber does, maybe better. The branch structure starts high. Like, the first major branching point on most of these trees is around 15 to 20 meters up, which would make conventional treehouse construction a nightmare. But around day 8, I started noticing that the trees here do this thing I haven't seen in any earth species. They send out lateral anchor roots above ground. Not the whole root system, just these specific lateral anchors that come out of the trunk about 6 to 8 meters up, and then curve back down into the soil at about a 45-degree angle. Note, Rook makes a sound here. It is, to the ear, clearly an acknowledgement of some kind. Yeah, he found that actually. I was looking at the trunk from below trying to work out if I could use the bark texture for footholds, and Rook just climbed one of the anchor roots like it was a ramp. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, that's what those are for. So the treehouse, which I realize sounds frivolous, and I want to address that directly. I built it for 3 reasons. 1. Elevation is better for signal transmission, which is why the antenna is up there. 2. Elevation is also better for observation. I can see about 2 kilometers in every direction from the main platform, and this world has predator-class fauna that I have not yet fully cataloged, so visibility is survival. 3. The first time I was working on the frame and Rook sat on the primary platform and made this sound, it's hard to describe. It's sort of a low resonant sound, less like a call and more like a vibration. But it happened when he was sitting up there looking out at the canopy. I thought, okay, this place is for both of us. We're both building this. The main platform is 9 meters up. That is intentional. 9 meters puts me above the browse line of the largest ground fauna I've seen, and below the canopy level that the aerial predators seem to prefer. It's a gap, a window of relative safety. Here is how I built it. And here is where the transmission does something remarkable. For the next 43 minutes, Cadet Elias Voss gave a detailed, thorough, and thoughtful construction walkthrough of a treehouse built on an uncatalogued alien world using survival kit components, cut alien bark structural members, and rope made from processed plant fiber he had learned to identify from a juvenile beast who had apparently decided to become his companion. The walkthrough covered anchor selection and root assessment, the knot system he devised for attaching the initial frame to the anchor roots, the floor construction using layered bark sections he described as basically free plywood if you strip the outer layer, the railing system, because I fell once in the first week and that was enough. The shelter overhang for rain protection, the antenna mounting at the highest safe attachment point, and a description of the view from the main platform at different times of day. At several points, Rook's sounds are audible. Twice, Elias responds to them directly, once saying, "I'm getting there, give me a second," and once saying quietly, "Yeah, that part is good, you're right, that part came out really well." The transmission ran for 51 minutes total. It ended like this. So that's the tour. I know this is probably not the standard format for a rescue beacon. I know there is a chance this comes through, and the first person who hears it is a military signals operator who is going to have to explain to their commanding officer that yes, the missing cadet is alive, and also he did an architecture walkthrough for 50 minutes. I'm okay with that. I've been alone for 46 days, alone except for Rook, and I wanted whoever finds me to know not just that I'm alive but that I'm okay, that I figured it out, that this place, this specific uncatalogued piece of the galaxy, actually kind of gave me what I needed. That's something worth saying. Also, I want the xenobiologists to know about this world, about these creatures. They're remarkable. They deserve study, and more than study, they deserve recognition. Whatever protocol we have for first contact with intelligent species, that should already be in motion. I'm flagging that clearly. Rook is. Pause brief. He's looking at me right now the way he does when he knows something is happening that he doesn't have a frame for. He's smart enough to feel the change in the situation. Smart enough to know this transmission is something. I'll keep the beacon running on repeat for as long as the power cell holds. Probably 4 to 6 days at this transmission interval. Come find me. Theta 9b, the treehouse in the Big Grove, about 6 kilometers south-southwest of the pod impact site. I'll be the human, Rook will be everything else. Signal ends. Duration, 51 minutes 4 seconds. Origin, unmarked Theta 9b, coordinates as separately logged. Operator note Vral Y. I played this back 4 times before I finished writing the alert. The 3rd time I was trying to identify the animal sounds. The 4th time I was not. The 4th time I just listened to the whole thing. Chapter 4, The Reaction AT Omega 7. Personal testimony. Signals operator Yena Vral continued. I want to be honest about what happened after I sent the alert up the chain. I expected the standard procedure. Acknowledge, log, route to recovery operations, begin jump calculation sequence, issue holding communication on the rescue timeline. Clean and efficient. What actually happened was that within 6 hours, I had 17 separate incoming queries from 7 different departments, including 2 I didn't know had any reason to be involved in a missing personnel case. The first calls were expected. Fleet recovery operations, UEF missing personnel, the Perseverance's command staff, who had clearly been waiting 46 days for any word and who I could hear, faintly, in the background of the officer call, someone saying something that sounded like "thank God" before they remembered they were on a formal channel and went quiet. Those calls were normal, those I understood. Then Fleet Intel called. That one surprised me a little, but not much. Uncharted world, new intelligent species. That's an intelligence matter. It makes sense. Then the Xenobiology Division of the Galactic Science Cooperative called. That made sense. Then the Galactic Unified Council's First Contact Mediation Office called, which I had honestly not known was still an active department. And their representative was a Vethric academic named Counselor Ixine, who spoke very good standard but asked me to play the transmission again 3 times, and at the end of the 3rd playthrough said, in what I can only describe as a deeply thoughtful tone, the juvenile beast makes contact first. He allowed the juvenile beast to initiate. I said I wasn't sure what that meant. She said, it means the boy is smarter than most of our trained diplomats. Then my commanding officer's commanding officer called, which had never happened in my 19-year career, and he wanted to know if the transmission was authentic, and I said yes, and he said, he really built a treehouse, and I said yes, sir, he did, and there was a long pause where I could not tell what he was feeling, and then he said, good kid, and ended the call. And then the public relay intercepted it. I want to be clear that this was not my doing and not my station's doing. We transmitted the alert on secure channels, but tight beam transmissions, especially long ones, generate echo scatter that can be picked up by civilian relay networks if the geometry is right. The geometry in this case was right. Someone on a civilian relay station in the Calder Fringe shipping corridor picked up enough of the echo scatter to reconstruct a partial signal. They posted it to the open communications boards. Within 8 hours, it had been picked up by 17 news services across 6 species. Within 24 hours, every sentient being in the Galactic Unified Council's communications network who had access to open media knew about Cadet Elias Voss, his antenna, his treehouse, and his companion on Theta 9b. And the response was, I have been trying to find the right word for this for 2 weeks now. The response was warm. That is the only word I have, warm. From species that do not have a reputation for warmth toward humans, particularly, and from humans who were used to hearing about their people in the context of military conflicts and territorial disputes. The response was warm. In 40 years of serving the First Contact Mediation Office, I have studied 214 documented first contact events between sentient species. I have studied the formal ones, conducted by trained diplomatic teams with proper protocol support and species profile analysis and communication framework preparation that sometimes takes decades. I have studied the informal ones, which are usually messy, frightening, and frequently leave lasting damage in the relationship between the species involved for generations afterward. And I have studied what I have previously called the accidental harmonic contacts, the rare cases where a contact occurs without planning or protocol, and yet somehow establishes a resonance between two species that planned contact might never have achieved. Cadet Elias Voss's contact with the species of Theta 9b is the most remarkable accidental harmonic contact I have ever encountered. What he did, not deliberately, I suspect, which is precisely what makes it remarkable, is follow a contact principle that our most experienced diplomats understand intellectually but frequently fail to implement emotionally. He let the other species lead. He did not approach the juvenile beast. He was approached. He did not initiate interaction. He allowed interaction to be initiated. He did not assign a framework to the creature, did not project onto it, did not attempt to communicate on human terms. He watched. He was present. He was non-threatening. And when the creature showed him something, the anchor roots by his account, he let himself be taught. That is the hardest thing to do, for any species. It requires setting aside the instinct to be the one who explains, the one who demonstrates, the one who knows. It requires accepting that you are the student. A 17-year-old human cadet, alone and frightened on an unknown world, managed it. We should perhaps be doing a better job of teaching our trained diplomats from his example. The transmission itself, the Treehouse tour, is also worth examining carefully, not for its technical content, which is interesting, but for what it communicates implicitly. He is in that transmission saying, I have been here, I have made something, I am a builder, come see what I built. He is presenting himself as a being who creates rather than a being who requires rescue. The distinction is subtle but crucial. And the juvenile beast's presence throughout, the sounds audible on the recording, the moments when Elias addresses him directly, communicates something essential to any species who might receive that signal. That the human is not alone, but more importantly, that the human has been trusted by a native species. That is not a small thing. That is, in the language of first contact, an endorsement. We got the jump coordinates 11 hours after Omega-7's alert came through. Calculating the jump into an uncatalogued system takes time because you are working with incomplete gravitational data. And incomplete gravitational data means wider error margins. And wider error margins mean you come out of jump farther from your target than you would in a charted system. We came out approximately 0.3 astronomical units from Theta 9b, which is good for uncatalogued work. The navigator, Lieutenant S.A. Darkbow, was quietly pleased with herself. We ran full sensor sweeps before orbital insertion. Standard protocol for unknown worlds, and also genuinely necessary because we needed to know what we were dropping into. The world Theta 9b, and I'll use Voss's designation because frankly it works, is a Class M equivalent by the old Earth taxonomy. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, slightly higher oxygen content than Earth standard. Gravity within human tolerable range, slightly lower than Earth. Temperature range at the landing site coordinates, cool to temperate. There is a second season on Theta 9b where the temperatures drop significantly. Our meteorological models suggested this was approaching. But during the period Voss had been there, conditions were survivable. The biosphere is dense. Heavy canopy cover across most of the surveyed landmass. We identified 17 distinct megafauna species from orbit using thermal imaging. One of them was immediately identifiable as the species Voss had described. We could see them from orbit. That gives you a sense of their size. We identified the pod impact site from the scarring still visible on the canopy, and from there, we traced the 6-kilometer track he had described. The grove of large trees was unmistakable. They stood significantly taller than the surrounding canopy, and the thermal imaging showed 2 warm signatures at approximately 9 meters of elevation. 2. I want to note that clearly, 2 warm signatures, 1 human range, 1 larger, not human but warm-blooded and not on the ground, on the platform. I keyed the communication system on our descent approach. Cadet Voss, this is Commander Osai aboard the UEF Steadfast. We have you on visual. Please confirm you are well. The reply came in under 10 seconds. Commander Osai, yes, I am well. It's good to hear a human voice. He paused for exactly 1 second and then, I want to flag before you land that rook, the juvenile beast, may react to your approach. I will try to communicate that you're not a threat, but I'm not certain of my communication success rate yet. Recommend slow, non-aggressive approach vectors. His first words to a rescue team after 46 days alone, and they were recommendations on approach protocol for protecting the creature. I flagged that for the debrief notes immediately. We landed the shuttle in the clearing south of the grove, as he had suggested in a follow-up transmission. He was standing at the edge of the clearing when we came through the tree line. He looked, I want to be accurate here, he looked like someone who had been alone for 46 days on an alien world and had handled it. Not wild-eyed, not shaking, not tearful, though I have zero judgment for anyone who is any of those things after 46 days alone in the void. He looked lean, weathered, calm, and like someone who had something to show us. Rook was with him. The juvenile beast was approximately the size of a large earth bear in terms of bulk, but the proportions were different, longer-limbed, the shoulder structure notably elevated, the head held lower and forward than you would expect. The coat was dark charcoal, still carrying the softness of a juvenile rather than the denser weathering coat we had seen on adults in the thermal imaging. He stood beside Elias in a way that was not hiding and not threatening. It was more like standing beside, the way a companion stands. He looked at our team. Our team looked at him. He looked at Elias. Elias said something, I could not hear what it was, quiet, directed downward at the creature, and Rook's posture shifted. Not dramatically, just slightly less alert, slightly more settled. I don't know what was said. I've asked Elias and he said he wasn't sure it translated to words. He said it was more like, he used the phrase showing him I was okay. Showing the creature that he, Elias, was okay with us being there. That we were not a threat. Communicating his own calm to demonstrate that calm was the appropriate response. It worked. I introduced myself. I shook his hand. I asked him formally per protocol to confirm his identity and status. He said, Cadet Elias Voss, Serial 7741, 46 days on Theta 9b, all limbs attached and functional. Then he said, do you want to see the treehouse? I did, I genuinely did. but I had a medical team waiting and approximately 14 protocols to run through before I could get to anything resembling a tour. I told him so. He said, "Fair enough. Can Rook be logged as a point of interest rather than a threat? I want that on record before we do anything else." Physically, Cadet Voss was in remarkably good condition for 46 days of wilderness survival on an alien world. Mass loss was within acceptable range. He had lost approximately 5% of his baseline body mass, which for a 46-day survival situation is genuinely impressive and speaks directly to the food supplementation he had managed through local foraging. His hydration was good. His wound history, there were several, showed competent self-treatment. The knee that had been injured in the pod landing was properly wrapped and had healed without complication in a way that required him to have immobilized it correctly during the critical healing window, which he had. His hands were remarkable. The calluses from construction work were significant, not painful, well managed, but the hands of someone who had been building with their hands for 6 weeks. Cognitively, psychologically, I want to be careful here because the standard assessment tools are not always the best lens, and Cadet Voss is not a standard case. I ran the standard isolation trauma assessment because I'm required to. The results placed him in a category the assessment guide technically calls minimal acute distress presentation, which is unusual for this duration of isolation. I asked him directly how he had been feeling emotionally over the 46 days. He said scared for the first 4 days, after that busy, and then after about 2 weeks when Rook started showing up regularly, less alone. He paused and then said, "I missed people, not just my crew, people in general. That was the hard part. But Rook is, I don't know how to explain this to a doctor without it sounding like I'm misrepresenting something. He's not a person, but he's also not a person. He's someone." He made the alone part less. I told him that sounded entirely coherent to me as a medical professional and a human being. He seemed relieved by that. I noted in my medical report that the presence of the juvenile beast had almost certainly contributed meaningfully to Cadet Voss's psychological stability during the isolation period, and I recommended that the xenobiology team's work on this species be conducted with particular sensitivity to the relationship that had formed, because from a psychological standpoint, that relationship had kept this cadet functional and grounded in a situation where functional and grounded was not guaranteed. What I did not put in the official medical report, but which I am putting here because this is an archive and not a liability document. When we went up to see the Treehouse, and yes, I went, it would have taken a direct order from Admiral Sethukumar to stop me, and I saw the work that had gone into it. I had a reaction I was not expecting. The platform was solid. The anchoring was creative. The shelter overhang had a drainage channel he had cut into the bark members to direct rainwater away from the sleeping area. The railing, because I fell once, was low enough to not obstruct the view but high enough to function. The antenna mount was at the ideal angle for signal projection. And in one corner of the platform, there was a section of bark that had been worn smooth. Not from weather, from contact, from something sitting in that spot regularly, repeatedly, for weeks. Rook's spot. I looked at it. I looked at the view from the platform, the canopy stretching out in every direction, the way the light came through at the angle the trees allowed, the particular quality of quiet up there that you could feel even with 6 people on the platform. I thought, no wonder he's okay. If I had been here alone for 46 days, and I had this place I had built with my own hands, this view, this quiet, this companion who sat in that corner and kept me company without requiring me to be anything in particular, I might be okay too. I have spent 30 years studying non-human intelligence. I have had 2 cups of stim on this planet, and I already want to revise everything I thought I knew. The species here, I am going to use Voss's designation of Rook's people, internally until we have a formal taxonomic name, because it's useful to have a placeholder, and because frankly it fits, are not what I expected. I expected, based on Voss's description, a species in an early tool-use phase. Intelligent by any fair measure, but in the early stages of that intelligence expressing itself technologically. A species you could recognize as intelligent, but not one you'd immediately classify as fully realized in the sense that, say, the Vethric or the Brethek are. I was wrong. I identified this within 2 hours of beginning ground observation. The first thing I noticed is that Rook, the juvenile, who was with Voss throughout our initial survey, responds to novel stimuli with a specific behavioral sequence that I have only previously seen in species we classify as reflective intelligent. He looks at a new thing, looks away from it, looks at Voss, looks back at the thing. That's a 3-stage processing sequence: initial stimulus registration, social reference check, and reappraisal. That is not basic tool-adjacent intelligence. That is the cognitive architecture of a being who understands that other beings have perspectives on information that might be useful. In plain terms, he checks with Voss to see what Voss thinks before he finishes forming his own opinion. That's not an animal behavior. That is what I do when my colleague is in the room, and I'm not sure how to interpret something. Second observation: the adult members of Rook's group, we identified 7 adults in the area within our first survey day, responded to the presence of the Steadfast crew with a range of responses that were clearly differentiated by individual. Some were cautious. Some were watchful but not retreating. One, a large, dark individual who Voss believes is Rook's parent or guardian, was openly observational in a way that I can only describe as studied, deliberate. This individual moved in a way that minimized its own visibility while maximizing its observation angle. That is not fight or flight. That is tactical intelligence applied to information gathering. This individual also approached within 10 meters of our survey team on the second day, stopped, and made a sustained sound. I have it on recording. I will analyze the frequency structure in my formal report. That lasted approximately 30 seconds. Then it looked directly at me, held the look, and then looked at Voss. Voss said quietly, "I think that might be an introduction." I said I thought so too. I stayed very still and tried to radiate nothing that would read as threatening. I'm not certain I succeeded, but the individual did not retreat, so something went right. The formal survey will take months, years properly. What I can say in these first notes is this: the species of Theta 9b is intelligent, not emergent, not developmental, realized and operational. The reason first contact here worked, the reason Elias Voss is alive and unharmed and speaking to us rather than being a cautionary tale, is that the species chose to extend trust. They chose it. They were not obligated to. An unknown being falls from the sky into their territory, and they chose to extend trust. That tells you something important about what kind of people they are.